Jim, thank you for offering to answer some of the questions that we didn't have time for in our webinar. One of the questions that came up a couple of times was about executive functioning. We had a question from Nicole: given that there's so much to the big picture of student success, can you talk about where executive functioning or social and emotional curriculum fits in within a coaching cycle?
So I think that isn't an area we've really spent a lot of time looking at, but it sure sounds like it should be. And what I would say is it all comes down to how you get a clear picture of current reality. And I'm not familiar with assessment tools for executive functioning. It may just be interviewing the kids or interviewing the teacher. But if you're thinking that's going to be a big issue, I think you'd want to build something into that first part, that getting a clear picture of current reality element, and then looking at what you find when you do whatever kind of assessment you do. It could be a question that's woven into the identify stage. If you don't know where it's going to go, it could be there's actually a formal assessment that's done. It could be interviewing, as I said, the teacher and the coaches. But I think somehow you need to assess, where are the kids now? Where do you want them to get to be? And if executive functioning is what you're working on. And I need to learn more about it. I think that's a great question. But the first thing is, where are we now? Where do we want to get to?
What about adult learners? A question here says, do you have any research or ideas on how engagement might be different with adult learners? I work with educators in adult basic education settings. I definitely see all three of those aspects of engagement at play, but the context seems a bit different when students have already demonstrated some engagement by opting in or showing up.
Yeah, I don't know the literature on engagement for adult students, adult learners. My own experience, having worked with adults with learning disabilities, I set up a literacy program in North York and Toronto when I lived there, was that formative assessment, which I think is a way of increasing cognitive engagement, is really, really important. That the students are seeing every day that they can succeed, that you have a systematic way of providing that kind of feedback. That was my experience. But I think that formative assessment works for everybody, but for adult learners in particular, sometimes you're changing mindset from learned helplessness to learned optimism, is the way I put it when I did it. And they need to see that they're being successful. In my experience, this isn't a systematic study or anything. It's just my experience working with adults on literacy. When they start to succeed, it's a pretty powerful and positive thing, but they need to see evidence that they're succeeding. That's why the formative assessment piece is really key. We used an approach that had it built right in. So everything we're going to learn, we knew where we were going, we knew what was going to happen, they could plot their progress, and we found that to be really, really helpful.
Great. How is coaching a new educator on engagement different from a veteran educator? And how do you nudge them to see the problems that they may not realize exist?
Well, it might not be different at all, because you might have a new educator who has a lot of experience with materials they've been reading and studying, and you might have an experienced educator who hasn't really picked up a lot of things along the way. So the issue is, what prior knowledge do they have about teaching strategies and gathering data? And whether it's a new teacher or an experienced teacher, I think you need to make sure you have a powerful set of practices that are going to help them hit their goal. What is different probably about a new teacher versus an experienced teacher is that the new teacher is really, they need to know they're going to be successful. And we had a person who I featured at our conference this year who worked with new teachers, and she said an awful lot of what she does is just help people feel that they're going to be okay, and that they have other people who are like them, and that everybody works through these different kinds of sort of challenging situations. So I think you really want to pay with a new teacher a lot of attention to their social emotional needs, that they need to connect with other people like themselves. If they're one teacher in a school and nobody else is a new teacher, look around, everybody's got their act together except me. I must be deficient. And so they need to know you're not. You just need to work with other people, connect with other people, and you're going to have a better chance of success.
How can we encourage more leaders to value perception data around the school environment? We have a statewide climate survey that measures educator and students' thoughts about the school environment, but there are a large number of schools that devalue the benefits of knowing how people think and feel.
We have a column coming up on coaching up in the next couple of weeks in the Radical Learners blog. And but the crux of the column is that whether we're coaching people who we report to or we're coaching peers, there are some things that we still want to have in place, which is resisting moralistic judgment. So affirming the person and communicating our belief that they can succeed, and demonstrating empathy and resisting the temptation to go for quick fixes. So I think the first thing I'd say is if you're sharing ideas up as opposed to across, it still works from the same place, which we would call a partnership. And I think, then you want to ask good questions, share powerful literature, maybe explore the possibility of, say, doing something like a study of better conversations, which is all about creating a psychologically safe environment, or some other similar kinds of publications. But the first thing I'd say is I would want our relationships with people we report to have the same degree of respect and non-judgmentalism as our relationships with people we're coaching in our peer relationships. And I think we can't lose sight of how challenging it is to be a principal. It is a very difficult job and really important. And so empathy is a big part of the way we would have that conversation. But I think book studies, activities such as, like I said, better conversations is a whole school can kind of analyze the way they communicate. There are a lot of things you can do that way.
There was also another question about how to maximize the coach-principal relationship. Are there other thoughts to what you just said that you want to add to?
Okay, so from the perspective of the principal, I think the principal needs to be really supportive of the coach. He needs to acknowledge that they believe in what the coach does. They do that tangibly by showing up when the coach is modeling, or if the coach does a workshop, they maybe co-present or at least attend the workshop. And they do it symbolically by the way they speak out about the power of coaching. They might even actually be coached in front of the staff, or maybe they video record a lesson, they share the video with the lesson, and then they get coached. That's an idea Steve Barkley shared with me, and I think it's super powerful. They need to be really sensitive about time, that the coach can't be a coach if they don't have time. It's probably the number one challenge. And so to get clear on what the coach will and will not do and how much time it's going to take is a really important thing. On the other hand, if you're a coach working with a principal, probably one of the most important things to recognize is the principal doesn't have a lot of time. They're the most time poor people, if you want to use that language, in the system. There's a million people who want something from them, and they're struggling to keep up with the email and going to sporting events and doing walkthroughs, conducting evaluations, and all the other things, meetings. So to be sensitive to their time. And they also have a lot of just emotionally complex things to deal with. So I think in your dealings with a principal as a coach, what you want to do is be solving problems, be productive, be supportive and encouraging. And so if you know there's some issue that's coming up, to show up with, here are some 3 things we could do. Which one do you think would work? As opposed to, oh, I can't get this teacher to work with me. What do I need to do? That's key. I think you also need to be clear on boundaries. Is it a confidential conversation or not a confidential conversation? What is confidentiality? So there are quite a few things there. There's a blog, Radical Learners. We've got a blog about how principals can support coaches. But off the top of my head, those are important. I guess one other big thing I would add is that theoretical alignment is key. That is, if the principal is working from the set of principles we call the partnership principles, and the coach isn't, it's going to make the coach's job more difficult. And so to come to a shared understanding of the beliefs that support the coaching is really important.
Great. We have a set of questions that are sort of about the logistics of how to engage in coaching. The first one is, in my district, the I do, we do, you do gradual release model is widely used. What suggestions do you have to help teachers so that they're not robotic and therefore less engaging during the I do portion?
Well, the first thing is I would want to ask the question, if we do this correctly, what should be different for students? And so, having that student-focused goal is really important, because if you're using it effectively, it should have that impact on students you're looking for. And if not, you need to go back and look at it. Sometimes, though, coaching is just about how to learn how to do something. We call this implementation support. So sometimes what the coach is doing is just really working on that gradual release. And so for me, the first thing I want to articulate is a checklist that describes exactly what it looks like when it's done effectively. Then I want to go through that checklist with the teacher and say, what do we keep, what do we cut, how do we want to modify this? And then thirdly, I'd want the teacher to video record himself or herself while they're teaching and analyze their teaching using the checklist. And if making it more alive and energetic is something that needs to happen, then I would want to be describing those kinds of things. And so the person can see it in the video so they can see what they need to do. But for me, if possible, probably the most important thing would be to have a student-focused goal. If we do this, I do it, we do it, you do it, what should be happening with the kids? It could just be that at the end of every day you do it, you're going to have an exit ticket to see if the kids are really able to do what was modeled and practiced. But something like that, once you've got the goal, the student-focused goal, you're really going to need to get good at it for it to work.
So then moving into some slightly more logistical questions, how often should a coach meet or support a teacher to truly make a difference?
We don't have any data to support this. It's just kind of like my opinion. But my opinion is you probably need to meet at least every week. And excuse me, the reason for that is if you go more than a week, say 2 weekends, what happens is the urgency kind of goes out of the relationship, and the person will say, well, I'm going to get around to it pretty soon, but if I know you're coming back next Tuesday, I'm going to stick with it. So it may not be possible to do that, but I think if you go longer, my theory is if you go longer than 1 week, it's kind of problematic. Having said that, there was a study recently in Harvard Business Review that you shouldn't meet too often either. Like, don't meet every day, because that sort of takes the opportunity for reflection out of the situation. We're always on it and doing it, and there isn't that pause time for reflection. So maybe probably no more than 2 or possibly 3 times a week, depending on who the teacher is and what the situation is. Now, if you can't meet face-to-face, it's just not possible, you could use other things. So we use Marco Polo a lot as a form of communication, that free app for sort of video conversations. There's other ones that do the same thing. Zoom is going to be, or Skype or GoToMeeting or whatever it might be, are going to be better than just talking on the phone, but talking on the phone is better than texting, and texting is better than nothing. It could be email too, but you want to stay connected, and maybe texting is even better than email because people get a quick response. But we would say once a week is kind of the ideal, and if you can't do it, then find other ways to stay connected with the teacher, still leaving time for reflection.
And sticking with the theme of time, on the webinar you mentioned 5 to 6 hours of contact to reach a goal. And one of our participants asked, is that 5 to 6 hours average to reach the goal from the first partnership meeting, or after the current reality has been captured and the data-based goal has been set?
That's a good question. I'm not really sure, but I think it's a whole time that the coach and teacher work together right from the very first conversation. Now, initial conversation is pretty quick. Just not a whole lot happens there except to say, I could do video, we could get reality this way, but it's a pretty quick thing.
And what about ratios? Is there an ideal ratio between teachers and coaches?
You mean the number of coaches, the number of teachers a coach works with?
I believe that's what the question is asking.
Yeah. Well, I think you can sort of do it mathematically. Now, assuming the coaches are doing the impact cycle, you're probably going to have to analyze data. You probably have to meet for an hour, at least once a week. You may have some preparation time. So it might not be too much to say each person I'm working with is going to take about half my day. So about 10 people at a time. Now remember, we're going through a cycle that's probably going to be done in 4 to 6 weeks, and so that's another 10 and another 10. for some people that might be too much, especially initially. Initially, your job is just to learn how to do it. So you want a smaller number so you can go deep into learning the materials. But probably 10 is probably significantly challenging. Generally, I usually say the number is more than the teacher thinks, or more than the coach thinks, and less than the principal thinks. But that's kind of what we got in mind.
It sounds like a good rule of thumb. Another person asked,
I mean,
is this, go ahead.
Well, sorry, just to say, just sit down and think, what all do I have to do with this person every week? How much time is that going to take? And then multiply it, then average it out. So a half day per person seems to me. And this is based on not my work, but Dr. Marty Alford, who's a researcher at the University of Kansas. And she was leading one of our projects where we were coaching coaches. And that was her response to me.
Great. Is this process, by which I assume the questioner means the impact cycle, replicable without videoing when teachers don't want to do that?
Yes. You could interview the students, which I think takes as much courage as watching yourself on video to hear what the kids say, but the coach could interview a sample of the class. You could look at student work. The trouble with exclusively looking at student work is, what if there's 30% wasted time? And you're not going to see that by looking at, non-instructional time. You're not going to see that just by looking at student work. You probably need something in addition. And you could observe and gather data and share the data, but the problem with the data is the person doesn't have as clear a picture of reality as the observer does. So it's less effective than video. You can also offer to video record just the students and keep the teacher out of the video, or audio record the class and have the teacher listen to the audio. Or sometimes coaches have just taken their phone and turned it up towards the ceiling and recorded it that way, so you can't see anybody, but you can use the video. And you can also offer to video record use the teacher's phone and video record. You want to check to make sure that's legally okay. In some schools, you can't record students on your own devices, so I'd double check that. My worry is, though, if we're not using video, I'd want to know why. Because this is a generation of people who are doing selfies all the time. We're used to looking at each other. It happens frequently. And it could be an absence of trust. And if there's an absence of trust, then I want to step back and say, what do I need to foster an environment where the person feels trusted? So trust usually involves that you're skilled in what you do. Does the person think I'm skilled? Your character is one that promotes trust. That's you're honest, transparent, and fair. You're reliable. You show up on time. You do the things you're supposed to do. That you have an attitude of benevolence towards the person, and there's warmth in the way you interact. And if people can tell that you really believe in them, that you really truly want to do what's best for them. There's no manipulation here. And somebody said in my interviews, for me to trust somebody, I have to know, this is kind of crass, but I have to know they're not going to screw me over. Now, people know that, and trust is there. They're more likely to do the video. And, when I explain it to the teacher, I say, this is for you. This is your class. So we can make sure we focus on the most important things. If you don't want to do it, we'll do something else. But that's the way it goes. And so lastly, I'd say there probably isn't a football team in middle school in America that isn't watching video of their games. And that's because it's powerful. And given the prevalence of video there, why wouldn't we want to, try to do it more broadly in professional learning? But if a teacher really says, I had a terrible experience, I don't want to do it, I'm not going to say, oh, you have to do it. I'm going to say, well, let's look at other ways we can get a clear picture of current reality. Should I interview the kids? Do you want me to observe and gather data? Do we want to just look at student work? How do you want to do it?
Okay. Is there research on staying focused on a specific goal until you've reached a deep level of learning on behalf of a teacher? For example, from level 1 to level 4. Do you suggest a district should have foundational expectations for Tier 1 instruction clarified as a system, and then teachers would then focus on reaching a deep understanding of the Tier 1 instructional moves before they choose additional goals?
So what was the very first part of the question? I kind of cut out my ears.
Is there research on staying focused on a specific goal until you've reached a deep level of learning before moving on?
Well, the first thing is the goal if you want a deep level of commitment on the part of the teacher, the goal needs to be one that's established by the teacher. So if you wanted to have a structure in the way it's described there, you would need some kind of assessment that would still lead to the teacher setting a goal that's going to accomplish it. I think when teachers don't have autonomy, when the district says this is what we're going to do and you need to do it, there's a tendency to have people who are embracing compliance but not commitment. I'll do what they have. Just tell me what I have to do and I'll do it. And the more teachers have a voice and choice about what they do, let's say the levels of deep implementation as they're describing here, then I think the more they'll embrace and do it. So whatever it is, I'd say it's not a thing we do to the person. It's a thing that they determine themselves, and your assessment system would have to lead to that, if that makes sense.
That does make sense. And lastly, before we wrap up, how do we help coaches measure their impact?
Well, first off, to me, if a coach is successful, it's because they've set goals with teachers, student goals, either engagement or achievement goals, or both, and the students with the teacher are hitting those goals. So successful coaching leads to changes in students that are measurable, either engagement or achievement kind of goals. I think it's important to assess coaches, and we're working a lot on that right now. We have a beta model for evaluating coaches we're working on. But the heart of the matter is, are kids hitting engagement and achievement goals or not? And if not, we need to make adjustments. It takes a while to get there, but that's the purpose of coaching, is to help students have better lives and better learning.
Great, that wraps up the questions from the webinar. So thank you again for taking the extra time to answer everyone's questions.
My pleasure. Thanks for inviting me. I'm honored and grateful for the chance.